Hello everyone, we're back. This is the last subsection of the one variable calculus modulus. What I want to do in this subsection is to discuss with you some applications of derivatives and how we use them to either characterize functions or solve optimization problems. And there's going to be a lot of examples here. Again, these are not going to be extremely difficult, but they are going to be a good basis for what comes next and more complicated problems. So the first big use for derivatives is to characterize the shape of a function. So we have a proposition that says, imagine that you have a function that is continuously differentiable. Remember C1, we defined it in the previous subsection, and a point x0 in the domain of this function. Now, if the derivative of the function at that point is positive, then what we can show is that there's going to be an open interval that contains that point such that f is going to be strictly increasing in the interval. So in other words, if you have a point x0 and you have this interval ab, if the derivative of the function at x0 is positive, then we know that the function at least around that point is going to be increasing. On the other hand, if the derivative is negative, what we are going to have is that around x0, for a small interval, open interval ab, the function is going to be decreasing. Now, how can we prove this? Well, this is pretty intuitive. So remember our definition of derivative. If the derivative is positive, we can do it for positive, and then it's very easy to show that it holds for the second case. So let's take a point x0 in the domain of a continuously differentiable function. So we know the function is differentiable and we know that the derivative is continuous. And let's remember the definition of a derivative. So what is the definition of a derivative? Well, basically what we are doing is we are taking the limit as h goes to 0 of the difference between the y's when we change the x's by a little bit, which we are going to call h. So if we have a point x1, which is our original point plus h, and then x0, in order for this ratio to be positive, what must happen? Well, either numerator and denominator are positive, or numerator and denominator are negative. These are the only two possibilities. So let's take the first case. So if the numerator and the denominator are positive, that means that h is positive, and that f of x0 plus h is larger than f of x0. Now, what does that mean? Well, if h is positive, then it means that what I called x1 is larger than x0. And so we have, x1 here and x0 here. What does the part in the numerator say? Well, it's going to say that the function evaluated at x1 is going to be larger than the function evaluated at x0. And we know by definition that this is positive. So we can see that the function is going to be increasing. Why do we talk about a small interval? Because remember, the definition of derivative holds for a very small deviation from x0, an epsilon deviation. You can do the same thing if both of them were negative. And this is in the second and third line of the proof, but it goes in the same way. So what do we know? We can call this the first derivative rule. Basically, take a point in a graph. If the derivative of a function evaluated at that point is positive, then your function is going to be increasing. If the derivative at that point is negative, then your function is going to be decreasing. And notice that we are defining this at a specific point. So here I have an example where the derivative is not always positive or negative. It can change signs, but we can determine whether it's increasing or decreasing at particular points. So let's take this example. F of x is minus x squared plus 6. The derivative of this is simply going to be minus 2 times x. Remember, the derivative of 6 is 0 because this is just a constant. And let's look at the derivative evaluated at the point minus 2. So f prime at minus 2 is minus 2 times minus 2, which is 4, and positive. So we know that even if we didn't have the plot, we know that for this function, the slope at minus 0.2 is positive, so we know that this function is increasing at that point. On the other hand, if we evaluate this derivative at 1, at the second point here, then this is going to be minus 2, which is negative. So we know that the function at x equal to 1 is going to be decreasing. Okay, so this gives us a first idea of how this function would look like without, having to approximate it by plotting it point by point. Another thing we sometimes like to know is whether a function is concave or convex. And again, derivatives can help us figure this out. So let's look at a concave function. And let's look at a concave function and let's look at the derivative of that function at some point x equal to a. Now, one property of concave functions is that at a particular function that is concave at point A is that the tangent is going to be above the function, okay, as in this case here. So when we have a concave function and we plot the tangent, the function always lies below the tangent line. Moreover, another property that you can already see from this graph is that as we move from left to right, so as we increase x, what happens with the tangent? Well, it's becoming flatter and flatter. So what this indicates is that in a concave function, the derivative is declining or decreasing. In other words, the rate of change of this function is going to be decreasing when it is concave. On the other hand, when we have a convex function, the opposite happens. Look at the tangent of a convex function in the second plot. So we can see that when we are facing a convex function, the graph typically lies above the tangent lines, the tangent lines at different points. Moreover, we can also see that the slope becomes steeper and steeper as we move from left to right. So how can we relate this with derivatives? So notice, in the case of a concave function, we are saying that the derivative f prime of x is becoming smaller and smaller as we move from left to right. So f of x prime is decreasing. What did we say a decreasing function is? A decreasing function at a point is a function that has a negative derivative. So one way of figuring out whether a function is concave or not at a point is to compute the second derivative. The second derivative is simply the derivative of the derivative. So saying that the first derivative is decreasing means that as we increase x, the first derivative becomes smaller. In other words, that the second derivative is going to be negative. So if we take f prime as a function itself, we are saying that the derivative of that function has a negative slope. With a convex function, the opposite happens. We can see from the plot that if we think of the derivative of this function or the tangent line as a function itself, this derivative is becoming bigger and bigger. So it's increasing. Again, what does that say about the second derivative? Well, it's just saying that the second derivative has to be positive. So this is another way in which we can figure out whether a function is concave or convex, which is less convoluted than the definition that we saw the other time. And it's a little bit easier to compute once you can use the formulas. So, and this is all that this is saying, we can call that the second derivative rule. So if the second derivative of a function at a point B is greater or equal than 0, the function is going to be convex. If it's strictly greater than 0, then we are going to say strictly convex, otherwise it's just quasi-convex. If the second derivative is negative, then we say that the function is going to be concave. So in other words, what the second derivative is telling us is how the slope of a function is changing over time. And it's giving us an idea of whether things are accelerating or slowing down. So for example, let's say you are talking about US federal debt per capita and you plot it as a function of time. So if the function looks like the plot in the left, then we would say that, yeah, federal debt per capita is growing, but it's slowing down. The growth is slowing down. Whereas if we're in the second case, we would say that the federal debt is not really increasing, but it's exploding. It's increasing at an increasing rate. Okay, so this is a few applications of, how you would use the second derivative. Now, another nice property of first and second derivatives is that they allow us to figure out where maxima and minima of a function are. And for that, let me first introduce a critical point. So what is a critical point? A critical point in a graph is a point where the first derivative doesn't increase or decrease. In other words, is a point where the first derivative is equal to 0. So we could be like in point C, this is a critical point of function of the first function, or like in point B, this is a critical point of the function that is plotted to the right. Why? Because in both of them, the derivative is exactly equal to 0. So it's a point where the function is neither increasing nor decreasing. Now, we have a theorem that says the following, and this is one of the most useful theorems that you are going to use in your classes, that says the following. Suppose that you have a function that is continuously differentiable, or C1. Remember, this means that you can take a derivative, that the derivative exists, and that the derivative is going to be continuous. If x star is an interior local maximum or an interior local minimum, then x star is going to be a critical point of f. Meaning that if x star is either max or min, then it's going to satisfy the fact that the derivative of the function at x star is going to be exactly equal to 0. Because remember, that's our definition of a critical point. We sometimes refer to this as first order conditions, and we use it to find candidates for maxima and minima of whatever problem we are trying to solve. Now notice that this is not an if and only if statement. This is only giving us a necessary condition. So it's telling us, look, if you're trying to find a maximum or a minimum, they must satisfy, and their interior, they must satisfy that the first derivative is equal to 0. So first, we don't know if that's going to be sufficient. Second, we don't know if it's going to be a maximum or a minimum, because both of them satisfy the same condition. We saw that in the previous plot, okay? Both the max and the min, P and C, are going to satisfy the necessary conditions, or first order conditions. Now, how can you figure out whether this is a maximum or a minimum? Well, with the help of what's called second order conditions, or by looking at the second derivative. Let's combine the result we had before with what we were talking about regarding concave and convex functions. So let's look at the first case, case C. So case C is a critical point because f prime at C is equal to 0. It's a point where the slope is 0, but notice what happens if the function is concave. So if the function is concave, remember what we said before, it's going to be a case where a concave function is a case where the second derivative is going to be negative. What that means is that this is a function where, as you move from left to right, the function is growing, then it reaches a flat point where f prime is 0, and then it becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. So what does this mean? Well, this must be an interior local maximum, because it's a point where the function stops growing. On the other hand, if you have a convex function, which again, like in the second plot, f of b prime is going to be equal to 0, what is f of f prime prime of b? This is going to be positive when we are talking about the convex function. What's happening with the slope here? Well, we start with a negative slope, and then the slope is becoming less and less negative, which basically means it's growing until it becomes 0, and then it becomes even larger and larger on the positive side. Now, what does this mean? Then this thing must be a minimum, because we are at a point where the function is first declining, and then it's going to be increasing when we are talking about the convex function. So when we have a critical point of a concave function, then this is going to be typically an interior maximum. When we have a critical point of a convex function, then this is going to be typically an interior minimum, okay? Using then the first and second derivatives, we can not only find the critical points, we can also figure out whether they are maxima or minima. So mathematically, we can prove this. Imagine that our function is twice continuously differentiable, so it's C2. And imagine that this is an open interval, and let's consider a critical point x star of f. Remember, critical point just means that f prime at x star is equal to 0. If we evaluate the second derivative at that exact point x star, and the derivative is strictly negative, then this is going to be an interior local maximum. If the second derivative is positive, then it is going to be an interior local minimum. If the second derivative is 0, this would happen, for example, with a straight line, which has a second derivative which is equal to 0, then this could be an interior maximum or interior minimum or neither. Okay, so when are we going to be able to figure out whether we have a maximum or a minimum? First, using the first order condition, taking the derivative and making it equal to 0. Second, figuring out whether the second order condition holds, meaning that the function is strictly concave or strictly convex at that point. If it's strictly concave, we are going to be talking about the maximum. If it's strictly convex, we are going to be talking about a minimum. This theorem gives us what is commonly known as second order conditions. So when you are maximizing a problem, you always want to check, both of them. So we can come with like a cookbook procedure to find maxima and minima. Let's say you figure out what your objective function is, f of x. First, you want to compute the first derivative. You want to calculate the extreme, or we've been calling this actually critical point. And by the way, it could be more than one, but you want to find all the possible values of x that make f prime equal to 0. You want to call those values x star, and then you want to compute the second derivative of a function and evaluate it at x star. Again, if the second derivative is positive, meaning a convex function, then we are talking about a minimum. If the second derivative is negative, meaning a concave function, then we are talking about a maximum. So let's look at this with a very simple example. So let's say that our function is x squared minus 2x. So let me write it here. F of x is equal to x squared. Sorry, I already forgot what the function was. X squared minus 2x. X squared minus 2x. So step 1, we want to compute the first derivative. The first derivative, that's why we've been reviewing all these rules on how to compute the derivative. It's 2x minus 2. We are using here the fact that this function f is like the difference between two functions, the function x squared and the function 2x. And we are using here the derivative of a quadratic and of a linear function. Now, what is our first order condition? It's basically making this thing equal to 0 and solving for x star. So when we make this thing equal to 0, we have 2x minus 2 equal to 0. So our critical point is going to be the number 1. Okay? Now we want to figure out whether this thing is a maximum or a minimum. So we are going to think about our second order conditions, and we are going to compute the second derivative of f of x. And the second derivative is the derivative of f of x. And this is just equal to 2, which is a positive number for any value of x. In particular, the second derivative at x star equals 1 is going to be equal to 2. So let's remember, what does it mean that the second derivative is positive? It means that we are talking about a convex function and that we are talking about a minimum. So what did we do? We basically found ourselves the minimum of this function. Okay? Now, there are some considerations to take into account. First, that cookbook procedure, as described doesn't always work. It needs a little bit of tweaking. Why? Because it could be that when you solve for your critical points, you find more than one. And here we have an example in this red line. For example, both M and C are going to be critical points because both of them have a first derivative equal to 0. So the question is which one is actually the maximum. Moreover, if you compute the second derivative here, the second derivative is going to be negative for both of them because the function around M and around C, if you compute the second derivative and evaluate it at either M or C, is going to have the same sign. So how do you find what the global maximum is? Well, what you are going to do is you are going to take all your critical points and you're going to evaluate your function at all of them. And then you're going to pick the point that give you the largest f. And that's going to define your global maximum. Okay? In this case, this is going to be our global max. And this is simply a local max. Okay? It's a maximum, but it's not the largest interior maximum. Okay? So let's look at another example. Let's say that we have this function 1 over 3x cubed minus 1/2 x squared minus 2x plus 1. And let's try to find what the critical points are. So again, we use our first order condition. This is, I'm just taking the derivative of this function. Now this comes handy because some of these guys, times 2, some of these guys are going to simplify. So this is just x squared minus x minus 2. And we want to make this thing equal to 0. This is what we call our first order condition. Now notice that this is a quadratic function. In the previous module, we talked about when you have a quadratic function and you're trying to find the roots of the function, sometimes there's 0, 1, or 2 roots. We've talked about the formula for finding a root. So basically, solving for the critical points here is equivalent to finding the root of the function above. Now, if you apply the formula, then what you're going to find is that there are 2 roots that are possible. Either x star is minus 1, and that's the first root, or x star is 2, and that's the second root. Now, how do we know whether these are maxima or minima? Again, we go to our second order conditions. So let's compute the second derivative of this function. This is just going to be 2x minus 1. Now notice that now the second derivative depends on x. So it's not as in the previous case where the function was always concave. This function, may change and be concave for some points, convex for some other points. So we are going to evaluate it at the 2 roots. So f prime prime at minus 1 is 2 times minus 1, which is just going to be equal to minus 3. So this value is negative. We are at this point, the function is strictly concave. So we are talking about, so x star equals to minus 1 is an interior local maximum. Now, if we do the second one, f prime prime at 2, this is our second root. So our second root is going to be 2 times 2 minus 1. This is 3, a positive value. So x star equals, when we are evaluating the function at the critical point 2, then we get that the second derivative is positive. So the function at that point is concave. So we are talking about an interior local minimum. Okay? So again, when you have more than one root, you try the second derivative. Sometimes you are going to find that both are maxima, both are minima. If both are maxima or minima, you compare them. Or, like in this case, that one is a maximum and the other one is a minimum. Okay? Now, Another thing to consider is, okay, in the red example I showed before, I said, okay, we have two maximum values, M and C, and we said that this was the global max. Now let's think about us trying to figure out what the minimum are. So point D is also going to be a critical point, and when you compute the second derivative, you're going to have a positive value here. So this is in principle an interior local minimum. This is an interior local maximum. And now the question is point D the global minimum? Well, that depends on the domain of the function. If X is defined over all the real numbers, then D is clearly not a global minimum because, well, first we already see that there are other points that are smaller than this. Moreover, if the function keeps declining, then there is no global minimum because basically the global minimum would be when X goes to infinity. Okay? Let me move here. What about the straight line? Well, straight lines, if the domain is unconstrained in the real line, are neither going to have a maximum nor a minimum. The only way in which a straight line is going to have a well-defined maximum and minimum is if we are restricting attention to a closed interval in the real line. So in the first plot, there's no maximum and minimum. In the second plot, there is, because if we define our function between A and B, then clearly A is the mean and B is going to be the max. Okay? So to summarize, what do we want to do? Well, a procedure that will never fail is, first you compute all the critical points, and then you check which are the points at which the first derivative is 0, and you look at which one of them gives you the highest or the lowest number. Second, if you have a constraint set, you also look at the value of the function at the extremes, because it could be that even though the first derivative is not 0 at an extreme, that the function is largest or smaller than the function in the interior local maximum or minimum. So for example, let's say we have the red line and we, define it between 0 and A. So then clearly M is going to be our global max. This is an interior local maximum, which is also the global. And A is going to, global max, sorry. And A is going to be our global mean. Why? Because when we evaluate the function at D, and compare it to evaluating the function at A, the value at A is going to be smaller. So this is our global maximum. Again, what we need is that the function is defined over a closed set. So let's go back to the example we were discussing before. Remember, we had, in this example, two roots. One root was -1, the other root was 2. And now let's assume that we are defining the function on the interval -3, 3. So now when we want to think about local maximum, minimum, etc., what we want to do is we want to also check at the extremes. So I'm not going to do all the algebra here. You can do it or the computations at home. But if we evaluate this function f and plug in x equal to -1 in this function, this is going to be equal to 13/6 if I didn't mess up the calculations. When we evaluate it at the second root, this is going to be -7/3, which makes sense because remember the first one was an interior local maximum, the second one an interior local minimum. So it makes sense that the function is bigger in the first root than in the other. But now we also want to check it at the extremes. So when we check it at -3, we have -13/2. And when we check it at 3, this thing is equal to -1/2. So when we compare the function at all the critical points with our potential global maxima or minima, and the boundaries, what do we find? Let me change the color so I can emphasize it. Well, clearly, out of all these values, this is the largest, and this was an interior local maxima. So this is going to be our global max. And again, it's still an interior local max. Now, when we look at the other values, what's the minimum? Well, our interior mean gives us a value of the function that is small, but it's not as small as this value here. So this value here is going to be our global minimum. Okay, so again, what do you want to do? You want to find all your critical points, you want to figure out whether they are interior local maxima or minima, and then you want to check the endpoints. When you compare the value of the function at all your critical points and the endpoints, the largest one is going to be the global maximum, the smallest one is going to be the global minimum. If the domain is unconstrained, then you kind of need to figure out what happens as x goes to infinity or minus infinity. Okay, so two more results that are going to come in handy. First one, suppose that the function is twice continuously differentiable, the domain of f is an interval, and x is the only critical point of the function. So if x star is the only critical point of a function, and it is an interior local maximum, then it is going to be the global maximum. Okay? If x star is an interior local minimum, then it is going to be a global minimum. So if you have the function defined over some open interval, and in that interval you find either a local global maximum or minima, and it's the only one, then those are going to also be global. So that's result number one. The second one, which is also going to come handy, is that if you have a twice continuously differentiable function f defined over an open set, over some interval, if the second derivative is not equal to 0, so if it's either strictly concave or strictly convex for the whole domain, then f is going to have at most one critical point. So in the case, for example, of this function, or this function, for which, you know, for the whole domain, the second derivative is either always negative or always positive, then we know that there's only going to be one critical point. And from the previous result, then we know that that's going to be the global maximum or the global minimum, depending on whether the second derivative is positive or negative. Okay, so with this, we are already in shape to discuss how to maximize or minimize a function, how to do optimization when our function has only one variable. In two modules, we are going to discuss the case when our function can have more than one variable. So when we talk about multivariate calculus, which is the one that you're going to be using the most. But let's first introduce the idea of optimization for the one variable case. So what is optimization? Well, we are either trying to find the best thing from a set of alternatives given some objective function. And, you know, we use it a lot when we are solving economic problems with maximized utility, with minimized cost. We find the optimal level of production. We find the optimal level of pollution. We find the optimal tax rate that maximizes welfare, etc. Now, again, solving this problem is one of the most important applications of derivatives. So I said before, we use derivatives to talk about the shape of a function, but at the end of the day, what do we care about in economics? Optimization. So this is the most important use of it. And in some sense, talking about the shape of a function is an intermediate step to this ultimate objective. Oops. This way. Okay, so how do we set up a maximization problem? They typically have the same structure. So we could be trying to maximize a function. So this is how we typically write it. So we are maximizing the function f of x, or our dependent variable, choosing x. So what we have underneath the maximum is sort of our choice variable. F is going to be our objective function. This is what we want to make the biggest. And S is going to define your constraint set or opportunity set. So f could be a utility function, and S is going to be a set that determines what levels of consumption are going to be feasible. So it basically restricts your choice to a certain level of say, consumption or production. We could also want to minimize a function, and again, it's the same form. We have an objective, we have a set, and we have a choice variable. The value of x that solves the maximization or minimization problem, our optimization problem, is going to be called the maximizer or the minimizer. And we typically put a star to it. If x star is inside the feasible set, then we are going to call it a feasible solution. Now, the problem can be constrained or unconstrained. So sometimes we don't have any constraints, so we are simply just trying to find the maximum. Sometimes we have certain constraints. For example, when we talk about maximizing utility, we restrict consumption to be strictly positive because we don't like negative consumption. That's not well defined. When we talk about production, same thing. When we talk about taxes, we sometimes restrict the tax rate to be between 0 and 100%. Or sometimes we allow subsidies, but they cannot be larger than, 100%. Now let's look at a specific example. Again, remember what I said last time. One thing that is going to be very important, particularly for those of you that don't have English as a first or mother tongue or first language, is to go from the setup, the setup in words, to what do you actually need to do. So you may know the math, but you need to be able to do the mapping between what you are being asked and how to write down in terms of equations. In homework number 2, you're going to have, some practice trying to do this, but the more you can do, the better. Now let's look at an example. So due to the interaction of supply and demand, we are able to affect P, the price of candy, with the quantity Q of candies produced according to this simple linear model. P is 100 minus 0.1 Q. What are you being asked to do? Find the production level that maximizes revenue. And then there are some other questions. So let me talk a little bit about how the solving process works, and then we'll go to actually solve this specific problem. So how do you set up your maximization problem? First, you read the setup and you try to define what your dependent variable is. What do you want to maximize or minimize? So in our example, you are being asked, find the production level that maximizes revenue. So revenue is going to be the variable that you want to maximize. That's going to be your dependent variable. What is the independent variable? What can you move to maximize revenue? Well, production or the value Q. So here the Y is going to be revenue, the X is going to be the quantity. Okay? Second thing you want to do is you want to figure out what your objective function is. So you want to define, as in the example, what revenues are. And revenues are typically price times quantity. Okay, so that's going to be the objective function you want to maximize. Third, you want to identify whether there is a constraint that you need to be careful about. And if there is, and it's a constraint that holds with equality, whether you can substitute it back in the objective function so that you make this a problem of only one variable. Okay? And you want to figure out what the domain of X is going to be. Fourth, you want to use our first cookbook of how to find maxima and minima using first and second derivatives. Okay? And sometimes plotting the function might help. So remember, our first task is to maximize revenue. So what do we know? So we want to maximize, let's write down our maximization problem. We want to maximize the revenue function that is going to be a function of Q. This is our X, subject to the fact that revenues are price times quantity, and that price takes the form 100 minus 0.1 Q. Okay? So these are your constraints. Now, this looks like an ugly problem, but notice that we can make it into a problem of one variable, because we can plug in the P here, and once we have revenues as a function of Q, we can plug them here. So we can convert our problem to something that we've been discussing in the rest of the notes, So it's going to be 100 minus 0.1 q, remember this is p, times q. Equivalently, you're trying to maximize 100 q minus 0.1 q squared. So this is our objective function. Maximize revenue, choosing q. Now, how do we find the maximum? Well, we take our first order condition. Remember, we want to make the derivative of our revenue function with respect to q equal to 0. So this is just 100. Sorry, this is not very clear. Okay, it's going to be 100 minus 0.2q. I just took a derivative and made it equal to 0. So you can, this is an unconstrained problem, so there's nothing to worry about at the moment. So what is our q star? Our q star is going to be 500. Okay, then the second part, so we've solved it. Our q star is equal to 500, and this is an unconstrained problem. Then it says, okay, now imagine that you have costs of 20q. So how does that change our problem? Well, when there are costs, let me modify it directly here. You will have revenue minus, so let me go back to the problem. So now let's imagine that we want to look at your revenue net of cost. So now we want to maximize profits actually. So your cost function, C of Q, is equal to 20 times Q. So this problem is the same as before, except that now we are subtracting 20 times Q minus 20 times Q. So when we make the derivative, actually that's going to be modified. So 100 times Q minus 80 times Q is just, sorry, minus 20 times Q is just 80 times Q. So we can modify it here. And so the derivative of this is just going to be 80. So what is our Q star? Is going to be 400. Of course, you are going to produce less if you have to pay more costs. Finally, the last question asks, okay, now maximize profits, but taking into account that your production has to be higher than 450 units. So basically now what do you have? Let me put it with yet another color. So we are trying to find the level of Q that maximizes utility, but we have one more constraint, that Q has to be greater or equal to 450. Now, if we ignore that constraint and we solve the problem, the level of Q that would maximize profit would be 400. But 400 is not feasible. So if you plot your profits, they are going to be highest at 400. But your constraint says that you have to produce at least 450, so that you have to be on this side. So the critical point that we have found, which is a maximum, you can take the second derivative and actually check that this is a concave function, it's going to be unfeasible. So what is your feasible solution? Is going to be 450. So actually this is a critical point, but it is unfeasible. The only feasible point is going to be 450. Feasible max is going to be 450, produce this amount. Again, how do we check that this is a max? Because when we do the second derivative of R with respect to Q, we obtain minus 0.2, which is smaller than 0. So this function is going to be strictly concave in the whole domain. So this is going to be whatever critical point we find from the previous two theorems that we saw are going to be actually maxima. Okay? Later on, so here I kind of wave my hand on how to deal with a constraint. If the constraint is just a number, you can solve it as I did before. You can say, okay, let's solve the constraint problem, and then let's see if it falls in the constraint set and if it's feasible. If it's not feasible, then let's pick the best feasible point. Your constraints can be more complicated. You can have inequality constraints. So we are going, in a few classes, we are going to discuss how to deal with those by using Lagrangians, which is a more general method to dealing with constraints when they are more complex than just the one that I showed you here. Now, the last thing I have, and I'm not going to solve this whole thing, but I want to show you one thing in this example, and then we are done for today, is the following. So let's say that you have a company with a cost function x squared plus 4, and you're being asked about the production level x, for which average cost is minimized. Why am I bringing this thing here? Because sometimes when I put this type of problems, which are more complicated than this, but generally this type of problems, sometimes people just see cost and then they try to minimize cost. But read carefully the setup, because in the setup, what are you being asked? You're being asked about the average cost. So your objective function is going to be average cost. C is total cost. So what is your average cost? Your average cost is the total cost divided by x. So actually your objective is x squared plus 4 over x. Okay? In the notes, you can, or in the other set of slides that I put online, you can see the solution to this through several steps. The only thing I wanted to emphasize is that you do want to be careful about reading what the question is asking and actually trying to specify the correct objective function, because this is where most of the time people end up failing, not because they don't know the material or they don't know the math or they don't know the logic, is because they cannot properly do the mapping between, the word problem and the actual mathematical problem. Once you manage to do the mapping, and I would, if I were you, I would practice this a lot before you start your classes, because then you won't have time. Once you manage to do the mapping, then, all the classes that we've been doing are going to help you solve this type of problems. Okay, so that's all for today. The next thing we are going to talk about is linear algebra.